before you speak, you should think. Or should you? That is the question. Gosh, this gets me going. So, I had a friend, very old friend, who posted this meme. And this is not aimed at him, per se. This is something I've seen before. But it reminded me, and then I was reading something else, and I had to record something. I had to talk about it. So, I guess I should say right off the bat that what I'm about to say is probably, I don't know if it's true, maybe it's true, it's probably helpful, I think it's helpful, I don't know if it's inspiring, it is totally necessary, and maybe not kind. Okay, let me backtrack. So, he posts this thing that says, and again, it's a meme, and again, it's not against him, it's just this kind of shallow, philosophical, it's not even an argument. It's like it's less than a flashcard. It's like a postcard. It's like a quasi-philosophical flashcard, which is no philosophy at all. You can't have shallow philosophy. It's the whole point, right? To actually delve in there, to actually talk about and define your arguments. And I'm sorry I get so passionate about this, but God, okay. So it's the post generally says think before you speak, and then it spells out think, and then it spells out different words from the acronym think. The true stands the T stands for true, the H for helpful, the I for inspiring, the N for necessary, and the K for kind, and the thinking. Now I know what the post means. Okay, if I have to clarify this, in case I have to clarify it, of course I know what it means. It means that you shouldn't say stuff that you know not to be true, right? You know to be false. But knowing that something is not true and knowing that something is true, those are completely different things. Well, I mean, what do you know about what is truth? What does anybody know about if something is true? Unless you say it, unless you speak it, unless you say what's in your mind. Gosh. How do you know when something is helpful? Before you say it. I mean, have you ever been in a situation where somebody comes to you and says, wow, that story that you told or that thing that you related, that was really helpful. Can you tell? Can you think about it and say, I figured out this is going to be helpful for such and such. Like, that doesn't happen. In what universe does this happen? And again, I know what they mean. I know that before you speak, you should think about whether it's a lie. But when you say before you speak, when you're saying a lie, it's different, way different. That is it true? What do you know if it's true? Nobody knows what something is true unless you say it, right? How do you know if it's inspiring? Gosh, inspiring. I mean, isn't the whole point of something inspiring something that happens after the fact? Something that you ponder and you go, wow, that's inspiring. It's not something that happens inside your head. Is it necessary? Well, how do you know if it's necessary unless you say it? I just don't know how you know these things. Now, again, I know what they mean. If it's mean or rude or just attacking somebody for the sheer casual reason of being bad or being malevolent or being evil even. But even then, I give you another thing about this. So how do you know that this post is true before you post it? Because maybe you need to not only be careful when you speak, but you also need to be able to think before you post. And I just don't think you can do that. So the way that we do that is my friend and anybody that posts this, for me, shallow and dumb thing and idea, but I will defend the fact that they should be able to do this. I'm not going to say, well, wait a minute, you're not being kind to me, right? No, I'm going to say, yeah, you should. Because when somebody posts something like this, I can say, well, is it true? Is it? That's why I wrote the question marks. Is it true? And I don't think this is true. I don't think this is true. I think that we need to be able to be free to speak what we need to say without being afraid. The other thing that I was reading about where I connected these two things was anxiety. Now you might think, what does anxiety have to do with this? I think it has a lot to do, actually. Because, so if you think about, okay, so there are many things. First of all, let me say this. I've struggled with anxiety most of my life. Not only my adult life, but most of my life. I remember years ago when somebody told me, the first time ever somebody said to me, you know, Gabe, you're a very anxious person. I looked at him and said, anxious? Me? Anxious? What are you talking about? Well, then I thought, what is anxious exactly? I don't know what that is. Well, I was anxious so much of the time that I didn't even know what it was like not to feel anxious. So, and then also anxiety and depression. And I think that there's a component of, and again, this is just my hypothesis, and I'm just getting it out of my head so I can work things out. There's a component of fragmentation inside of a body. And when you have those fragments inside of a body, and if they're really separated, they create this tension and this pain. And I deeply believe that, and I believe that we experience that fractioning as depression and as anxiety. Now, that being the case, I'm not saying that depression and anxiety don't have a chemical component or at least factor, right? I'm not saying that. I'm sure that, and I've actually tell this to some people that I know that struggle with anxiety and depression. Hey, take Prozac, take encitalopram, take Lexapro, right? All these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, because that's good. You know, you give it a little push. I took the antidepressants. I don't know if they were good for me, and I cut them cold turkey, and that wasn't a good idea. But anyways, and so what does this have to do? Because if you're afraid to speak your mind, if you're afraid that you might not be helpful or necessary or kind, if you're afraid that you're going to be chastised in the meeting because what you say is not necessary, if you're afraid that perhaps the things that you say and you think are actually not true, and somebody is going to come at you and say, hey, that is not true, I still think that you need to say it. So if we accept this to be true, which again I'm saying is not, but let's say we accept the fact that we should think before we speak. And I'm not saying we shouldn't think at all before we speak. That's not what I'm saying, in case it needs to be clarified. But let's say we accept that we need to be careful. We need to, and this is for me. This is the kind of, and yes, for me, this shallow philosophical postcard is not just shallow, but I don't know if it always is like this, and maybe this is just a cynic in me, but it tends to be propagandistic. It tends to be this, be careful, and to relate this kind of fear, right? And that's why I put the quote of Michel de Montaigne, which is you could call him a philosopher. He's more of a self-journaling person, self-journalist, maybe the first and only self-journalist. It's just fascinating works. He basically just writes about himself and his experience. He says something like, if you are afraid, if you are fearful of hurting, then you are already hurting from being fearful, right? If you're afraid, if you're fear of being hurt at some point, you are already being hurt by what you fear, right? It's a beautiful quote. And so for me, the extension, if we hold this to be true, and we should think before we speak, do we need to think before? Is there things that we shouldn't even say inside of our own head? And I think that a lot of us can do that. And is there things about you that you do not accept even to yourself? Is there things about you that you wouldn't even speak even to yourself, to myself, right? I'm not saying I'm any better at this. This is just me getting this stuff out of my head. And I think that many times we do that. And when we do that, when there are things that we think about ourselves, we feel about ourselves that we won't even discuss with ourselves, this is where we split. This is where we fragment ourselves. These are lies by omission that we tell ourselves, right? Lies by not saying the things that need to be said, even in our own heads. And God knows that I've suffered from this. Gosh, there's so many things that shame is one of the most powerful feelings that humans can experience, that we can experience. And this is just a bad thing. So, and the reason that shows itself as anxiety, I believe, and again, not to say that there are other factors, as I talked about like 2 videos ago, that there is no single point of cause in a complex system with interdependent variables, right? There's no what I call privileged point of causation. It's not my words. So I really think that if we accept this premise, and if we're so careful about what we speak about, and again, I'm not saying be careless. That's not what I'm saying. Because again, we are actually talking philosophy here. We are actually talking the mode of behavior. We actually talking ontologically here, the reason for being of speech. What is the ontological origin of speech? Well, to say what you feel, maybe. But maybe it is to find out what is true, and what is helpful, and what is inspiring, and what is necessary, and what is kind. And if we don't, I think we experience that as anxiety, as depression, as these parts of ourselves battling each other and hitting each other and being in disagreement with each other. Because a lot of parts of ourselves are in disagreement. You might think, well, what parts of me are in disagreement? How about the part of you that wants to have dessert and the other part of you that says dessert is a really bad idea, right? We all experience this in lesser or bigger ways. But I just don't see how we can get out of this. And when we feel this anxiety, and again, anxiety is not, and I've explained this before, anxiety and the way that it works in the brain, it's a system that is always on, but it's just inhibited, right? So if you think about anxiety as this engine, this engine of we can relate it to even artificial intelligence. It's like this thing that is always so. Fire alarms. How do fire alarms work? So fire alarms work with, there's a tiny little laser that goes through and it reflects on a mirror. Okay? And so when there are enough smoke particles in between the laser and the mirror, it goes off. So my smoke alarms, and I have a couple, it's not that they're off. You can't hear them because they're inhibited. Right? So they're always on, but they're inhibited, right? Anxiety works the same way. Anxiety is always on, like a thermostat, right? It's set at a certain threshold, and everybody has different thresholds depending on, among other factors, their level of neuroticism. And I mean that technically. I don't mean that, I'm not trying to call anybody neurotic. I'm saying that that's the technical definition, the technical name for sensitivity to negative emotion. So, but it's always on. It's always on. And when the temperature goes down enough, using the analogy of the thermostat, it clicks. You don't have to turn it on. It's not something that you have to, I gotta remember to be anxious. And the reason why that's important is because if you don't say what you mean, if you don't start articulating these things, then you have all these things inside of you that are all fragmented out. and you need to be able to say it, and you need to have people to say it too. And those people need to be able to listen to you. And those people need to think and give you the benefit of the doubt that perhaps you don't know if it's something is true. You don't know. You're just saying it. Maybe it's in a relationship. And I've been in situations like that where I feel something. I don't know if it's true. How do I know if it's true? And you gotta be forceful, and you gotta be you gotta risk it. And I'm going to defend the fact that anybody needs to be able to post even this lame, stupid, and shallow philosophical postcards, because they need to say this so that I can tell them, hey, you're wrong. This isn't true. And this is why this isn't true. And then they can say to me, well, actually, this is why this is true. And then we can have a conversation. And they need to risk whatever they say not be helpful. Because maybe I don't want to talk about that. But they need to risk it. Because if they don't, then how would they do it? They need to risk the fact that maybe it won't be inspiring. Because I don't want to hear it. Maybe it's not necessary because I'm stubborn. And I'm not going to change my mind no matter what. But they need to risk it no matter what. They need to say it. And they need to risk not being kind. Because sometimes you just have to slap somebody. Or you need to be slapped. Because somebody needs to say, hey, buddy, you are wrong. And this is why.